Gifted made me feel and think a lot of different things. As soon as I became familiar with the basic premise, I knew I wanted to watch it. And I have to say, there were bits in this that I thought were fantastic. There were some characters who really, really irritated me with their attitudes. And I also have some thoughts on the ending as well, but I will keep those until the end of this. I will give a spoiler warning in due course, but for the most part, this will be spoiler-free. This was released in 2017. It's directed by Marc Webb. It's written by Tom Flynn, with a cast including Chris Evans, McKenna Grace, Lindsay Duncan, Jenny Slate, Octavia Spencer, and various others. And McKenna Grace plays a character called Mary. Mary is being raised by her uncle, Frank, and Mary is very gifted, particularly in maths. And we see this when she goes to this new school. She joins this class. Her teacher asks some basic maths questions for her age, and she gets them right. And then the teacher starts to ask really complex questions that the average adult can't do in their head, and I include myself there. And of course, she gets them right. The teacher has to check on a calculator, and she realizes very quickly Mary is gifted. And she talks with Frank and says, look, we don't think this school can support Mary's abilities. And Frank doesn't want her to go to a school for gifted children. He wants her to stay there and have a typical childhood. Will she stay there, or will she go to a gifted school to help further her abilities? And on top of that, Mary's grandmother also wants to have custody. I was emotionally invested, honestly, before I started watching it, but definitely from the very beginning. And initially, before I started watching it, I thought the normal school, the typical school, is probably the best option for her. But then we learn just how gifted she is. It's not that she's just at the top of her class, phenomenally gifted with maths. And then I thought, okay, well, if she stays at this school, she's going to be bored, she's not going to be challenged. And of course, these were some of the teacher's arguments. So when her uncle said no, with no regard for how that boredom and lack of challenge could really significantly harm her mental health, I hated him instantly. Because he was clearly being very selfish and not even willing to consider what may or may not be best for Mary. So I hated him pretty much throughout the entire film. And the bulk of the film is trying to decide what the right thing to do is, with various different opinions. It gets quite legal. There are some courtroom scenes which I loved. I thought they were absolutely brilliant, really fascinating. The story had a very strong start. It did slow down a bit in the middle, but once we got to those more legal-heavy scenes, that's for me when things became really, really interesting and really intense and honestly quite unpredictable. The characters are very, 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 very well written. As much as I don't like Frank, I do think he's a very believable character. The performances are all great. McKenna Grace was unsurprisingly fantastic. The visuals are great. Camera work, lighting, the locations, all very satisfying. It's a good, very thought-provoking film. And I'd love to know in particular, if you watch this, do you have the same thought by the end of the film as you did at the beginning? As I said, for me, I initially thought a typical school and having a typical childhood is usually going to be the best way. But then again, as I said, once we realised immediately, within the first few minutes really, just how gifted she is, I very quickly changed my mind and realised that actually that could be severely damaging for her health. So I had a lot of conflicting thoughts throughout the film, but I was very much adamant that I hated Frank, not because of his gut reaction decision, but because of his unwillingness to even entertain the thought that his gut reaction decision could be the bad choice for Mary. I don't think he had her best interests at heart, which might contradict something I'm about to say, but I will sum up briefly by saying, solid film, very thought-provoking, very well written. I will now talk about the ending. And I do have quite a few thoughts here, so this is definitely a big, big spoiler warning. At the end of the film, it's ultimately decided, well, just before the ending actually, it's decided that Mary will go to this school, and she will go to this school by going into foster care, and this is to kind of prevent her grandmother getting custody while still allowing her to go to this gifted school, or school for gifted children. And the message there is that if you're in a similar situation as Frank, the only option is for your child to go into foster care. And I don't believe it. I don't buy it for 1 second. I don't think that the court would rule this in real life, because what they're saying is Frank can't support Mary. And yeah, he has things he needs to work out. He's not a perfect parent, but the court is basically saying somebody who's not perfect is unfit to look after their child. And there's a little bit more to it than that, but I think the decision was not only terrible in the film, but I think it was also very unrealistic and not sending a great message. And Mary also, obviously as a young child, all she knew is that she was being sent away to this gifted school, and in order to do that, she had to leave her uncle, who is her primary caregiver. So for Mary, going to this gifted school means leaving her uncle. Obviously, she's not going to, as gifted as she is, she's not going to understand the complexity of this court ruling. And that's horrible. She's always going to associate that gifted school with being forced to leave her uncle. And I just think it was really, really stupid. And I don't believe it. I don't buy into it. And I don't think that it's in Mary's best interest at all. And then what ultimately did happen is that Mary goes back with Frank. He fought for that, and I'm glad. I'm glad he didn't just give up. I'm glad he didn't just say, fine, this is what the court wants. She's going to a different school. I'm no longer involved. I'm so glad that he showed that he loved her and that he did actually want what's best for her. And what ultimately is decided in the film that is best for her. And I do like this. I don't know if this would be realistic or if it ever happens. If anybody knows, please let me know. But what ultimately happens is that Mary is able to move back with Frank. I won't say exactly how it unfolds, but she moves back with Frank. And she goes to her typical school to be around children her own age. But in her spare time, we see her taking college classes. There's a shot of her in a room, a lecture hall, where there are just obviously fully grown adults, or at least fully grown teenagers, and then Mary taking these classes. So it does seem like that's the best of everything. Is it realistic? I don't know. That part of it, I don't know. Will she still be bored at school? Yes, but in a way, I feel like she'll still be able to enjoy other things at school. Their arts and crafts. She'll learn skills like cooking, I assume. And I don't know what they teach in schools today, but certainly I think there are still a lot of great opportunities for her to have at school. She's not going to miss out on prom and all of these other things while still being able to exercise her mind in other ways. So if this is realistic, that's fantastic. If not, that sucks. But I still think that the whole going into foster care so that she can go to this school and being away from Frank, I don't believe it. If anybody wants to tell me that it's actually very much based on a true story, that part of it at least, then I guess I would have no choice but to believe it, but I still personally don't really buy into it. So the ending made me feel a lot of things, but the last few scenes I did enjoy. And ultimately, I thought Gifted was a very powerful film, and needless to say, it's certainly one that I'm very happy to recommend.